You know, I'm right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in entertainment, media, sports, entrepreneurship, and so much more. Nick Durst here, along with the one and only Joe Calabrese. And Joe, everybody knows that we have the number one reality TV podcast out there, but our guest today has the number one challenge podcast out there. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So he is a fellow Secures alumni. We've had a lot of Q's alumni on with us, so we'll get to talk about that. It's WrestleMania season, but he is the host and he is the producer of the Challenge Mania podcast. And we're very, very excited to have him on. And we welcome Scott Yager to the show. Scott, what's up? What are you doing? How are you?
How are you guys? Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here. I love the name of the podcast. I love the I don't know where you got those official numbers, but I love the accolades. And of course, I'm always down to talk some Qs. I'm always down to talk some wrestling, and I'm always down to let other people ask the questions every once in a while because Lord knows I ask a lot. And
Yeah.
so
That's what do you
thanks for having
think?
me.
You got the answers. We changed the questions, and that's what we're
Mhm.
gonna do here. And we'll jump right into this. You have a lot going on in your life, personally, and of course with the podcast and work. So what's the first app you're checking in the morning when you wake up?
Probably FanDuel. No, I'm kidding. No, but no, in all honesty, it is. Well, and first of all, it's funny when you say in the morning, I have both the luxury and the burden of I wake up probably about 36 times between like initial pillow touch and
Yeah.
quote unquote the morning, between just A, not really getting great sleep, B, someone in my house making a noise. I
Mhm.
have, as you mentioned, I have three kids. At some point during the night, one of them needs me for something. So I'm waking up quite often and quote unquote checking several apps, but I get the point of the question. And so you don't mean like, because, obviously I'm one of those people who sleeps with like one earbud in. I'm always listening to a podcast. So I'm often, I guess, checking the podcast app to like reset what I'm listening to.
Mhm.
But no, I think what you mean is like, what's the first order of business?
Yeah.
And I joke about the FanDuel thing, but I'll use it as a way to summarize of that, I do go to bed like fairly early, as far as like I sometimes will go to bed before a lot of stuff, whether it be Raw or whether it be sports or whether it be big news things sometimes happen. And so I am often kind of catching up on like who won the game, did my
Uh-huh.
parlay hit, whatever. And so, it's a good example. It might not always be FanDuel, but it is kind of like, what did I miss is sort of the answer.
Yeah. How do you like having Raw on Netflix? 'Cause for me, it's more annoying to go watch it on not having it on DVR. I hate having to go scroll through a Netflix DVR. I had it set. I could skip the ad breaks. I knew exactly how to get to it because I'm a guy who does not watch Raw live most of the time. I got to watch on Netflix now. It's a little more complicated to fast forward.
I'm such a weird person to ask that question because, like, on paper and to the naked eye, like I'm wearing a Outrunners shirt on a Tuesday
Yeah.
here. I just went on the Chris Jericho cruise. I've been to probably 350 wrestling events. I named my podcast after WrestleMania, essentially. If you check my Instagram, it looks like I just stalk these people and take pictures with them. So I look like the biggest wrestling fan in the world, which I am. And I could probably answer any question about what even happened on Raw without actually having sat down and watched it for 3 hours. So for me, when you ask me that question, I just think anything that seems to be moving in the direction of where the world is going is good for both wrestling or in the instance of the challenge. So Netflix is like how 90% of people I know watch anything. Movies don't exist until they hit Netflix. Movies that weren't even good in the theater will go on Netflix, be in the top 10, and all of a sudden you have people talking about like Molly's Game, like it should have won the Oscar just because it was on Netflix. Like we
Molly's
know
game was very
from
good.
and I like Molly's Game when it was in the theater. Don't get me wrong, an
Sure.
underrated Sorkin movie, and Jessica Chastain. But my point is that like when things hit Netflix, they really hit the zeitgeist these days, right?
Hmm.
We just had like an election that I think like proved that, for instance, podcasts like yourselves, like Joe Rogan, like Theo Vaughn's, like whomever, whether it be even the big pictures and the rewatchables of the film world or whatever it is, like podcasts now are the thing that people in a certain age demographic are going to the same way that we went to the TV, right? Same thing for streaming. So for WWE, I am so happy that they're on Netflix. I think overall, globally, especially, it's great for them. But as far as like what's easier for me to then sit down and watch 3 hours of Raw on, it doesn't really matter because I never watch 3 hours of Raw. Like, today, like in today's day and age, this is how, here, to go back to your first question. So on a Tuesday morning like today, I wake up, I might check FanDuel or whatever, or check my emails. But the first thing I'm putting on is, and I know this is a polarizing person in the wrestling world, but I'm logging into my WrestlingObserver.com account and I'm listening to Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez do their Tuesday morning podcast in which they will cover Raw and tell me exactly what happened. And they'll also just tell me everything I need to know about the wrestling world. I know a lot of people hate Dave Meltzer. I actually just respect the guy more.
He's the best. He came out with us.
He came on the show and he was awesome.
Yeah.
He still hasn't blocked though, but
to me, I think he is a premier, regardless of the sport or regardless of the industry, one of the premier journalists in the world. And I get that he's polarizing to some wrestling fans. I get that a lot of people in the industry don't like him for various reasons, but that's kind of the way that I digest a lot of what happens on Raw. Between that and Twitter clips, the fact that now everything's so snackable, everything's highlight based, even in the podcasting world too. It's something we've run into, the idea that now, if you ask anybody who's like 15 to 25, they think that like being a fan of a podcast is essentially watching or digesting the 3 or 4 clips that you selected and put on TikTok or Instagram or whatever in video form. The idea of listening to a 90-minute audio program is not even something they fathom. So that's just the way that the world goes. So I think it's great, very long-winded way, by the way, of saying that I think Netflix is great for it, even though it's not necessarily easier or better for me than say DVR is. But when you have 3 kids, you're not sitting down and watching 3 hours of Raw. Like, my buddy is nice enough to be taking me to Raw here. I think March 10th they're here at the Garden. I'm going to go. That will be
Joe's going to be there too. You guys have to meet
up. There.
I'll see you there. Let's say hello.
Yes.
And that will be the only full episode of Raw that I watch until I go to Raw again.
Right.
It's same thing with games. Like I go to, a few games a year. Luckily, when we travel for Challenge Mania, occasionally we'll attend a game. Or like, my son is now old enough where he gets to I took him to a Knicks game. My wife typically takes him to Rangers games, but like, those are the only times I get to watch 4 quarters of a basketball game. Like, I'm lucky if I get to watch a quarter here or there, but again, I'm 40 and I still will say that like in today's day and age, this is kind of how I'm digesting content, whether it's Raw or whether it's wrestling or whether it's sports or podcasts, whatever, it's all through this. So the ease at which I can get it through this is actually beneficial. So Netflix, I would say, is probably the way to go. I apologize, Nick. I know you're an old school DVR guy, but
I have Netflix, obviously. The ease of fast forwarding through all the matches and commercials is a lot easier on the traditional DVR device. Because you could see the previews of what's going on and skip through. That's just one thing. But it's interesting because you're talking about everything going digitally and whatnot. I think it all depends on the platform because some of these social streaming platforms are awful, like Hulu and Paramount Plus, because the ad breaks are awful. And
but
the
like,
ratings,
are you not?
Well, that's what.
Let's be okay.
That's why on DVR I can skip through it.
Yeah, but you can't tell me this is the #1 reality podcast and you can't afford to pay for no ads. Come on. Come on. There can't possibly sometimes. There can't possibly, because here's what I'll say. To me, if you're not paying for no ads, then in my opinion, why are you paying at all? Obviously, there's exclusive content, but like for me, like actually the quote unquote ad breaks for me, like they're almost a breeze. I don't even kind of process them because like when we watch Traders on Peacock or let's say All Stars on Paramount Plus, it just goes from one segment to the other. My brain tells me, okay, that's where some cheap person is listening to an ad. But like, for me, it's non-existent. So what I would say, maybe we could start a GoFundMe. And and we can raise some money for Nick to not, because that's honestly another one of the upgrades of streaming, because the reason that cable still exists at all, right? Like the reason these companies are even wasting money doing everything they need to do, cutting in the Spectrums and the Comcasts of the world, is because they're able to sell to Pepsi. We guarantee you that if someone's watching this live, this thing will play and they will have to watch it. Yeah. But in every other industry, there's a tier you can buy. You can exempt yourself from that. Even with Challenge Mania, if you listen to our podcast, it's littered with ads. I wouldn't even listen to it. It has so many ads. But we do say, if you want to pay $15, come to Patreon, come to challengemaniacs.com, no ads, and that's kind of the new way. It's sort of the great capitalistic way of saying, if you hate ads, just fork over a little bit more money. It's almost like we'll take your money instead of the idea that you might be using that money to pay for the products in the ads, which I'm like, sure. I mean, if somebody needs to get the money, I'd rather it be you and everyone could just shut up about the Pepsi or the tampons or whatever. And, maybe I buy those on my own,
Well, on the reverse spectrum of that, I don't watch enough of these shows like to justify, let me pay all this money for Hulu just so I could maybe watch the Kardashians. Paramount Plus, I had it just for the challenge, but even MTV and Paramount realized nobody's watching Paramount, so we're gonna put it on TV. So that was perfect for me. No need for Paramount Plus anymore. I have Netflix, and the ad breaks are fine on there because they're like 30 seconds. That's fine. Again, it all just depends on the platform, the subscribers, but ultimately, we're getting on this whole topic here of subscription platforms versus cable. Ultimately, there's going to be a streaming platform one day that's going to monopolize all the streaming platforms, and then you're going to have cable once again, but streaming wise.
Well, let me ask you this, Nick. You guys are professionals here covering, as you said, reality television, but entertainment in general, right? This is definitely something you could be writing off on your taxes. So there's no reason that every single streaming platform you're paying for, your cable, your internet, all this stuff wouldn't be a tax write-off. And depending on who your accountant is, your mileage may vary on if you're writing off 100% of it or partially. But my point is that you should be allowing yourself the ability to digest as much of this as possible so that you can do a better job or a more expansive job covering it for your podcast. And the IRS and the government agree. I've been writing off not just streaming platforms and things like that, but tickets to concerts and movies and things like that, because I'm an entertainment professional. I'm a performer. It's not even I'm a smart guy. My accountant had to tell me this. It sounded like a joke to me. I was like, oh, yeah, because we're like screwing them. She's like, no. That's actually like some of the things on paper that, and the reason being, I would assume, is that it kind of helps the world go round, right? Like, if you're doing it for your job, if you're covering it for your job, these shows want you to be watching them, right?
Sure.
And you're in fact doing your job better because of it. Now, granted, you are your own boss. You're the one telling yourself, oh, I need to watch. Either way, my point is, it doesn't matter. To the IRS, it's all the same. It's part of the business. And I don't know, I don't want to get too into the weeds of how you guys do your business, but my point is that if ads are getting in the way of you, say, watching certain shows or enjoying certain shows or expanding your palette of like what you're watching and stuff like that, just think about that. Like the added $6 here or $10 here for the tier, even if you're not able to write off the entire $25 a month for Netflix, you're certainly able to write off the $10 portion that's the difference between the cheapy tier and the ad tier. So just a thought. Just a thought.
My only observation with Netflix is that the show has been ending at 10:30. So if you pay for it without the ads, you can kind of mow through it in 2 hours. And that's, I think, Triple H's MO now that he's running the company, because SmackDown is 3. In reality, they should be 2 2-hour shows. But I understand if one is 3 and one is 2. Shorter the better. But again, if you don't have the ads on Netflix, you can kind of mow through it and kind of get to it in 2 hours, which is, I think, ideally what everybody wants. So again, that's just my quick observation, but let's move on here, Scott, because we want to talk about how you grew up, and we want to talk about your decision to go to Syracuse, because in the past we've had many media people, Syracuse alum. Nick always asks the question, what's your decision? How'd that work out? Because going to upstate New York is not really a walk in the park. It's very, very cold up there. So, what led you to go to Syracuse, and was something like broadcast media something you always wanted to do?
Yeah. So when I was a kid growing up, I was into more or less two things. And it was wrestling, which I quickly found out wrestling, it wasn't something you could really major in college. But the entertainment industry, movies, TV, music, even things like that. And that I was delighted to find out around like junior year was something that you could do in school. I was also in high school really into journalism. I considered getting into broadcast journalism specifically. But the way it shook out at Syracuse, I didn't really necessarily have the grades to apply to Newhouse, which has the broadcast journalism program, but I did to apply to VPA, Visual Performing Arts, which had at that point the film major, which they had either film drama or film art. And there also is a version of film in Newhouse called TRF, or was at the time, but it was a little different. When I was in high school, even though I had like a 2.8 GPA, I was very unrealistic in that there were only three schools I wanted to go to: Syracuse, NYU, or USC. I got like immediate no's from the first two, NYU and USC. And Syracuse was the only school I visited. I went to visit like an upperclassman when I was a junior, or maybe a senior, actually. And somehow, by the grace of God, I got in. My mom was very sort of, did a lot of the work for me with the application. So I applied to like many other schools I definitely wouldn't have gotten into, like BU and BC and all these things, Northwestern, all whatever. She was like, I'll do the bullshit parts. You just write the essays. And I literally only got into, I didn't even get into Marist College. I got into
Joe's school.
That's my school.
No offense to you and to Marist.
It's become a little prestigious.
It's Marist University now.
Marist University.
But it was at the time. I'm positive it was Marist College at the time.
Yeah, up until 6 weeks ago was Marist
College. In a lovely city called Poughkeepsie, New York, that I grew up going to ECW events in.
Yep.
But I applied early to there because it was sort of my quote unquote safety school, because that's what all the cool kids had, right? I was like this career journeyman 2.8 kind of. I was like the Zach Morris, the guy who always thought, oh, when I take the SATs, I'm going to get a 1500, but I just don't try hard in school. But my junior year, I did kind of, I like going into my junior year, I actually did really well in class. I got elevated. I was with all the AP kids who like, you use all these terms like safety school and, college prep and whatever. And, what was the Kaplan and this and that and blah, blah, blah. But too little, too late, obviously. So I applied to Marist. I don't get in. The only schools I got into, and I applied to over 10, were UMass Amherst, Hofstra, which is in Long Island, it was my mom's alma mater, and then Syracuse. When I got into Syracuse, to say that my guidance counselor was surprised would be an understatement. So it was an immediate yes. I'm going to Syracuse. My mom came and picked me up from school. She was so happy. I could tell immediately what she was talking about. And that was right before it was. So I found out probably late February 2003. And then, if your memory serves you, if the year jumps out at you, several weeks later, we're in the NCAA tournament. We're a 3 seed. Carmelo Anthony's a freshman. And it was, I think, only my first or second year even doing a bracket. I knew so little about it that, of course, I'm going to pick the school I'm now going to. And suffice to say, I won my bracket, and I got to watch us win the only national championship in school history, and then got to ride as a student the like post-national championship sort of honeymoon phase, which I would say is, being there for the championship, it would have been great and everything like that. But riding the sort of wave that comes after it was awesome too. And the expectation that comes with it, and the college game days coming and whatnot. And then, much like in high school, in college, I was a terrible student. Obviously, I was a good student in that I think lived it up, went to a lot of games, went to a lot of parties, made a lot of friends, things like that. A lot of our classes would be at like 7:30 in the morning, as you know, Joe. Half of the year, it's blizzard or 20 below zero, whatever. You don't want to go to these things, and so I just had a bad attendance record, did very poorly, whatnot. My plan of doing well my first year and then transferring to Newhouse, that didn't happen. So I stuck it out in VPA, and then as like your ability to take other classes expanded, I took some classes in Newhouse and whatnot. I got into a little bit of trouble my junior or sophomore year, had to take a semester off, almost actually left school completely, ended up taking 5 years to graduate. So I was class of 07 initially, had to let all my friends go and graduate, had to come back and do a full year where I barely knew anybody. My 5th year, it was fun because a friend of mine from high school who also went to Syracuse, who was a year below me, that year, he and I, who still to this day partner on a lot of fun things. He's got a great creative agency now and a bunch of businesses and a company called Three Wishes. My 5th senior year, his senior year, you might remember this guy. We had a great freshman class of basketball players led by Johnny Flynn and Dante Green. And Dante Green. Which one of you guys went to Syracuse, Nick or Joe?
Neither of us. He went to Marist.
I thought you guys said you have a lot of Syracuse alum. It's just
a lot of alum on the show.
A lot of
it's just because you guys interview successful people, and Syracuse breeds successful people.
Nick went to St. John's, and St. John's.
You guys are doing well now. You guys are doing well now.
Scott, I want to ask you real quick. Sorry to cut you off, but did you ever cross paths at Syracuse with Carl Radke from Summer House? Because he was there the same time as you. He said the same story about I came as a freshman right after Carmelo Anthony won the championship. rode the wave. It seems a lot of people we have had on always talk about the impact of Carmelo Anthony on their college experience at
Well,
Syracuse.
look, I was just listening to an interview with Nick Wright, who I think was a year below me, and he said the same thing. So it is very obviously, I think anybody who went to Syracuse, whether it's 02, 03, 04, 05, whatever,
Yeah.
you kind of felt that, like I said, wave of that excitement. But no, I don't remember him. And that my one kind of intersection with that show is there's a guy when I grew up with him, his name was Scott Weston, but I believe he goes by something else on the show. God, what was his name on the show? Now I'm forgetting what his name was
Is
on
he
the
on
show.
now?
He was on one of the first seasons.
Okay.
God, what was his name? He like changed his name slightly. Everett.
Everett, yeah, David
Yeah.
Lindsay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Everett, who I grew up with, when we grew up, his name was Scott, but yeah, he goes by Everett now. So that's my one intersection with
He
someone.
probably changed his name because he was always getting confused with you.
Hey, one time, this is a fun little weird story. So we went to basketball camp together. He was always very good, tall, thin, lean, very good player, and I was not. And I one day when they're announcing the awards at the end, they gave the coaches award to me. Now, coaches award meant to sort of more be for hustling and things like that, but there was it was Scott, and then everyone assumed it was going to be him, and it was Yager. And then I was like, I always to this day wondered if they gave it to the wrong Scott by accident. We'll never know. But so maybe they got confused. But to go back to the Dante Green of it all. So Dante Green was like our star, small forward kind of shooting guard, wing player, who everyone at the time knew this guy's probably leaving to go to the draft. We made these shirts at Syracuse. A lot of people just make like gimmicky shirts that say like a couple words on an orange shirt with blue letters. So he spelled his name DONTE'. So we moved the apostrophe over and wrote like Don't leave. We made all these shirts. We went to the game. We gave them out, and we somehow got one to him, I think through a mutual friend. He wore it during warmups. All the people covered it. It got all over TV, whatever. We had set up like some sort of a Gmail or a website, whatever. And we're selling these shirts like out of my dorm room, like hotcakes. And again, to like go to the future. And now, I have Challenge Mania, and my friend Ian, who I worked with, has his own business and things like that. And it was huge. It was in the New York Times and ESPN and everything like that. And eventually we got a cease and desist from the school saying that we were in violation of the student conduct policy and whatever. And we went to a lawyer, and the lawyer's like, look, there's nothing in here, but this student conduct, they can basically do whatever they want. So if they want to say you can't graduate, stop selling the shirts, you should probably stop selling the shirts. So we stopped selling the shirts. Anyway, he ends up going to the NBA. He did not have a good NBA career, to say the least. I still root for the guy in life. I hope he's doing well, but I think he has since been arrested a couple times as well.
Oof.
But either way, if you also talk to anyone who was at Syracuse in 2008 and they were a sports fan, they will remember Don't leave. It is still occasionally mentioned by the Syracuse blogs and stuff. But that was kind of the first taste, to bring it back to the like autobiographical thing of it. That was kind of the first taste that I had of like, going viral, if you will, using the internet or using kind of like a grassroots campaign to kind of get a little bit of, and of course it wasn't even us at the time that was taking over. It was the shirt, but we were the people behind the shirt. And then cut to obviously with Challenge Mania, it's not me, it's the challenge, and it's the podcast, and it's Derek, and it's the name Challenge Mania and things like that. But just kind of, being behind something that you can tell means something to people care about, people are talking about, like having a little taste of that fifth year, it sort of makes me feel like, obviously, if I could trade it, I probably would have saved my parents the $100,000 and graduated in 4 years. But if there's one thing that came from that extra fifth year, it was that.
So talk to us about the next decade of your life there. What's your first job out of college? Then you're in production, you're working in production for many different years, and you're also producing very different types of genres for shows for different networks. You're doing hard news, you're doing children's stuff. So talk to us about all that time there from graduating Syracuse and working your way through the production field.
Nice. You've done your research. I'm flattered. So yeah, I get out of college, and of course I'm a film major. I think, I'm going to be like Steven Spielberg's assistant, and I'm going to get in a writer's room. I'm going to be working for SNL by the end of the year, whatever. And ironically, the summer before my fourth and fifth year of college, I actually did get one day as a PA on the now critically acclaimed, and I kid, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And so worked one day on set. I was like one of a million PAs. I barely did anything. But then I graduate, and the first job I get is actually in the reality TV world on America's Next Top Model. And I do a good job. It's here in New York. I'm still living out of my parents' house in Stamford, Connecticut at the time, but I'm commuting via the Metro North every day. And I'm working, I would get in at 4 p.m. and I would leave at 4 a.m. every day. And I was like, you work at the house where the people live, and these house reality shows are not unlike the real world and the challenge, but this one was about models. And you're living sort of in the basement in the control room, and you're doing every which thing. You're driving people places, you're doing gopher work and whatnot. But if you do a good enough job, they want to, bring you on the next one. Now, of course, the next one was in LA. So I don't live in LA. They're definitely not going to pay for someone of my stature to live in LA. So through somebody I knew, I was able to like crash on a couch or sublet or something like that and work on that season of that. And then basically the way the reality world works, especially at the lower levels, is they need so many people and they need so many good people. And if you're good at your job, word will get around fast. Hey, call this guy. He's good and this and that. So I worked on, your Project Runways, your America's Top Models, Amazing Race, Frank the Entertainer's Basement Affair, which was a spinoff of I Love New York, which was a spinoff of Flavor of Love, which was a spinoff of whatever. And I worked on these and just kind of worked my way up. And my mentor in the industry, who I won't say his name, but he was a production manager at the time. His name will come up again. That's what he was. He was a production manager en route to becoming a line producer. That's kind of the management / money like kind of trail to the top. There's different ways you can get to the top creatively and things like that. I always thought I would have been better at the creative side of things, and I think it's been proven at this time. But either way, I went the money route. So I went from PA to assistant production coordinator to production coordinator to production manager, and kind of just bouncing from show to show to show to show. The way the TV world works for the most part is freelance. So every 3 months or 6 months, when your show's done, you essentially lose your job. If you're good at it, you can find another one in a few months or a few weeks. But either way, it's just like there's no job security. Around 2014, I did get what is, few and far between, which is job security. And I posted up at a production company where I was their in-house production. I was actually brought in as a production coordinator. 2 days in, they fired their production manager because she sucked, promoted me, but of course were able to kind of pay me less than they would pay her because I was getting promoted. And I was their in-house production manager for going on 4 years. So I went from kind of production manager to line producer, and was kind of gradually getting, more money along the way. And at that company, we would do sort of docu-series. So less kind of big competition shows, more small co-production docu-series that would range from behind the scenes sports docs, like the 24/7 hockey series you guys might have seen, like Quest for the Stanley Cup,
Oh yeah,
Road to the Winter Classic, a show
I
called Men
love
of
those.
March. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're great. They're awesome. And like I unfortunately would never get to travel for a lot of these. I would kind of be the home base guy who was planning everybody else's travel. Okay. We'll come back to that as well. So skills I was acquiring, but not necessarily benefiting from in the moment. Okay. I then simultaneously, after meeting my wife, got into voiceover work. I always thought I'd be good at it. She was like, okay, for your birthday, I'm going to get you a consultation with a voiceover coach. We'll see how far you take this. So I take that, I make a demo, I get an agent. And then for years, I was actually doing really well in the voiceover world, voicing commercials and things like that. One of the later shows that we did that I produced called Give, I was also the narrator of. So that was one of the last shows I did at this company. It was called Give. It aired for 1.5 seasons on NBC. And I was the production manager for season 1, the line producer for season 2, and I was the narrator for both seasons. And we won the Emmy for Outstanding Children's and Family Program, which is like a little bit broad because like children's can mean like, oh, it's a cartoon about a bat. And it could also mean just like it's family friendly, which is what this was. Basically celebrities would go to charities, pretend they were there to like do something else, but really they're there to see how they could use the money, meet with a bunch of philanthropists, and then come back with a huge check and say, here, this is, $50,000 from whatever. And so did stuff like that, cooking shows, what's the other ones? Travel shows, things like that, until November 2017, Give gets canceled and they let me go. This is November 2017. I'm about to get married in February 2018. Coincidentally, all the bosses that had just fired me still came to my wedding, which is kind of awesome, but also kind of weird.
Hope they give you a nice gift.
They did. It was good. But so right around then, a little guy who you guys know by the name of Derek Kosinski, to bring it into Challenge Mania, which I know what we're segueing to, texted me out of nowhere. And I hadn't heard from this guy in about 7 years. And reason being that simultaneously, while I was working in production, I always, had a passion for interviewing people, for celebrities in general, for kind of just, being sort of a personality and things like that. All this stuff I was secretly wished I was doing while I was working on these shows. I was doing on my own out of my, parents' basement, for lack of a better way of putting it. I was hosting a podcast called A Shot of Yager. I worked for a magazine called The Sound Magazine, where I would get to interview a lot of people who would come in to do either music or comedy or things like that. And this is in like 2009 or 10, before the word podcasting even really exists to the average person.
Right. Just you and
Public,
Colt Cabana out there. That was
I
it.
mean, it was basically Bill Simmons, Adam Carolla, Joe Rogan were the only like major people doing it, and then a few other comedians and things. And so when I would get an interview with like Bill Maher or Slash from Guns N' Roses or Chris Cornell or Darius Rucker or Lisa Lampanelli or Andrew Dice Clay or whoever, I would just like quickly say, hey, and since I'm recording it anyway, why don't I put it up as a podcast? And then in addition to the Connecticut date, we can also promote the other dates on the tour. And they didn't know what a podcast is. They just thought, oh, that sounds like less work for me, but better for us. So sure. So I would just take the audio I would do for this interview that they thought was for a magazine, which it was. And you could always kind of tell halfway through it, them realizing what, because most magazine interviews, people are just kind of like typing and talking. And they're like, so what's the next thing? And like, there's no sort of presentability to it. Whereas I was always like, welcome to A Shot of Jaeger. And you could kind of hear it in their voice. Like, what is it? But halfway through, they'd kind of get it and they'd be like, okay. And I would put all those up and no one would listen to them because I didn't have a following. And even though these guests had a following, they weren't necessarily promoting it because A, they didn't even know they were on a podcast. And B, they're doing 40 interviews that day. Why would I pick one? And occasionally someone would retweet it. But for the most part, crickets. I was often getting in trouble at work because these people who were paying me $2,000 a week to book flights for people, they would see my Twitter and it would be like, check out my interview with Mick Foley today, blah, blah, blah. They'd be like, aren't you supposed to be booking flights? What are you doing? And so after a while, since it wasn't really benefiting me financially, I go, okay, I guess the podcast ship has sailed, and I kind of put it on the back burner. But while I was doing it, through a mutual friend, that same mentor I had in the production field, he had gone to high school and grew up with Derek Kosinski. He said to him at the time, Derek, this is when Derek was first on the challenge and starting his own podcast. He didn't even call it a podcast. He called it Ultimate Challenge Radio. He said, you should hit up my friend Scott. He has a podcast. He interviews cool people. So I get this random email. This is in 2009 or so, or maybe 10 or 11. Hello, this is Derek Kosinski from Road Rules. I was wondering if you want to have me on your podcast. And I'm like, sure. Yeah, I love the real world and Road Rules and the challenge. Let's do it. So we did a podcast. He's like, you're interviewing all these cool people, like these UFC fighters and stuff. Like, how do I get into that? I'm like, to be honest with you, it's kind of a hack. I do this thing for a magazine, blah, blah. I go, but look, next week I'm interviewing Jake Shields. You want to interview him with me? He's like, sure. So I let him interview Jake Shields with me. Then the next week he tried to return the favor. He's like, you want to interview Mark Long and Blair Herter with me? So I did that. And, we had each other's numbers, but we kind of like, we're again, never met in person, just acquaintances, hadn't spoken since. Cut to 2017. I've just gotten fired, for lack of a better term. He has just gotten back on the challenge for the first time in 7 years. He's come in second place on Dirty 30, and wisely so, because now the rest of the world is caught up to podcasting. He gets home and the first thing he wants to do is start a podcast. He picks up his phone, and this guy's been working in the oil fields for 7 years. He doesn't know anybody who knows how to do anything other than fracking except this Jew. So he texts me and goes, hey, do you want to do a challenge podcast with me? Had he texted me 2 or 3 weeks earlier, I would have said, sorry, dude, I'm busy. I'm producing a show. Best of luck with it. Because I had just gotten let go. I'm looking for something to be able to tell my wife, yeah, I'm doing this before I finally have to go get another real job. I say yes. And the rest, as they say, is history. We're still doing it today. So, and it is my full job. I no longer work in production. I told my wife, give me till the end of the year. If by the end of the year I'm making enough, not to humble brag, whatever, if by the end of the year I'm making enough, as much as I was in that field, I would like to keep doing this because this, unlike those jobs where I was booking flights and getting calls in the middle of the night about hotels not being ready and this and that for other people, now I get to do it all for me. And so if I can keep doing this, and if I can keep doing this and keeping us afloat the same way when I was doing the other stuff, I'd rather do this. And it's not necessarily working in TV, but it's sort of TV adjacent. And to this day, people are blown away to hear that you can make as much money talking about TV as you could by working on the TV show itself. And it is kind of a sad reality of it, no pun intended, but it's true.
So, at what point after you started would you say that the show really, really started taking off? Because a lot of this had to do with the way the social platforms developed and whatnot, and how that stuff ended up being incorporated on the TV show as well, with all the social media drama. So, at what point did you say that this is really taking off here? And also, you mentioned earlier the name, obviously, a play on WrestleMania. Was Derek all on board about that right away?
Derek is people always joke, oh, there's no such thing as a casual wrestling fan. He is a casual wrestling fan. He is certainly not like, unlike me, who at least goes and listens to the Meltzer pod about it. He's not watching Raw at all, and he's not listening to the Meltzer pod. He almost, I think, doesn't even really understand like where wrestling's real and not real, right? Like that, but he appreciates it. He loves it. He obviously grew up playing with the Miz. He loves the pageantry of it. He knows how big of a deal it is and things like that. And here's how we got to the name. When we were trying to come up with a name, truthfully, we're kind of circling more like cutesy names. Like there was a podcast. I think it's no longer existed, but there's a podcast called like You Killed It or something like that, or TJ Hates Quitters. Like these are sort of odes to the show itself, where you have to watch the show and it's kind of an insider reference. And we were trying to kind of come up with something like that. But in the way that we were describing what we wanted it to be, we always kept coming back to like, but we want it to be like turning the challenge into wrestling, or like covering the challenge, like Sports Center, or like the WrestleMania of this and that. And I go, why don't we just call it Challenge Mania? Like, that's like, instead of thinking that as being like a shirt we might have to promote our thing with a less cool name, let's just call it that.
Yeah. And also, then, I gotta assume you want to have challenge in there for SEO purposes.
And that's the thing, is sometimes you overthink these things. Like there's a song by the Mighty Mighty Bosstones, right? It's called The Impression That I Get. But everyone knows the song as Never Had to Knock on Wood. Right? And the guy always says, Dickie Barrett, goes, if I could go back in time, I'd call the fucking thing Knock on Wood. That's what everyone wants. That's what everyone knows it as. Basket Case by Green Day. Everyone knows it as Do You Have That Time? But nobody knows it as Basket Case, right? So not to say they haven't done fairly well with Basket Case, but my point is that in the age of, as you said, SEO, search engine optimization and whatnot, sometimes it's best to just be simple, to the point, tell people what they're getting. And also because of the fact that, yes, they own the name The Challenge, but they don't own Challenge, right? And it kind of had a ring to it, as much as like, certain things don't necessarily have a ring to it, but Challenge Mania did. There's the idea of calling the fans or the listeners maniacs and things like that. And it just kind of clicked and it worked out. And again, like, you got to remember that at the time, I'm thinking this is going to be a 3-month endeavor, right? So I'm trying to like not waste time coming up with names, not waste time, overthink all this stuff that I don't think will even have a return that I'm there for, that we even care about. So we lucked into the simplicity of a few things. If you go and listen to our first podcast, we were sort of trying to implement things that didn't really stick, like, hashtag challenge accepted, and that'll be our way to answer questions and blah, blah, blah. And like, it eventually just kind of became what it was, but yeah.
Okay, and then what point are you saying, all right, let's go back to my college days here. Merch is where it's at. And what is the highest selling merchandise that you've sold?
So what's interesting about that is I will say that the merch is almost more a symbol of what we are and the challenge mania of it all than it is a money maker, for instance, right? Like, so, like we have chosen, and I think this was a decision we made early on, where instead of taking on any of the financial risk of like mass producing merch, there's 2 ways you can do merch, right? You can buy 1,000 of a really, like, say this shirt was like me and Derek, right?
Yep.
And if we bought 1,000 of them and we stored them in a warehouse, right, we could probably get them for like a couple bucks a shirt. But then I would have to be the one shipping them all out myself, dealing with any production issues, this, that, and the other thing. And if it didn't sell and we just like gambled wrong on a design, I'd be stuck with 950 Derek and Scott, Outrunner shirts that I'd have to just like ship to Africa, right? Now, the other way you can do it is you make far less money, which is you find a third-party drop ship site, and the one we use is called Threadless. And basically, you upload all your designs. They provide you the luxury of being able to offer every single color, every single style, hoodies, socks, hat, whatever it is, you name it, the person can decide. And they set their base price. They go, this costs us $14. If you want to make $2, charge people $16. But if you want to make $15, charge people $29, whatever it is. And so you end up making less money, but you're turning over all the risk. When we do live shows, however, we have to buy, say, dozens and dozens of shirts at the base cost, guess what people want, guess what sizes they are. I have to bring them in a suitcase. We set them up at the table. And the reason we do that is because we want, when you come to our shows, there to be a merch table the same way there is at a WWE event or a Drake concert or a Kendrick Lamar concert. And that's just part of the experience. So to me, part of the merch thing was less, we're going to make gangbusters on this. And not to say there haven't been certain designs that have brought in, over the course of 7 years, thousands of dollars of revenue, but more so what it does is it's telling people this is what we are. We're the glue between your fandom for the show and all these other things that you could do for sports teams and musicians and other people you support that you could never do for the Challenge or reality TV. Like when I was growing up watching the Challenge, I merely watched it and then went to bed and like maybe talked about it with my friends the next day. Yes, as time progressed, there was Reddit and Twitter and other ways to follow it, but there wasn't a thing you could go to. There wasn't a place you could go cheer these people on. There wasn't a way you could interact with them really. And there certainly wasn't a shirt you could wear to tell people at work or at the gym, hey, I like this show. So the merch, I will say, is kind of the worst example of like being able to support ourselves on it because like solely we couldn't do that. That being said, though, it is a very integral part, especially when we were launching, about separating us from just being a podcast. Like we're not just, and I stole that entirely from Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson. Like I say to this day, I have no problem saying it, that I stole more or less every single thing that Challenge Mania is and was, and kind of have expanded on it, but from two people. Okay. So Conrad Thompson is this guy who's very successful in the podcasting world and in the branding world, in the wrestling world.
Yep.
And then Rob Sesternino is that, but in the reality world. And he mainly covers Survivor. His second show he covers is Big Brother, but since he has this whole podcasting network where now they cover traders and the Challenge and everything under the sun. And him and Conrad are these two podcast entrepreneurs and conglomerates that I basically just was a sponge of everything they were doing. And the thing that Conrad was doing almost from the start, I would listen to this Bruce Pritchard show, and every 5 seconds they were dropping a reference and turning it into a t-shirt. And the whole time I'm thinking like, whether 8 or 10 people are buying this t-shirt, who cares? Just the idea that references from the show and things like that are being put on a t-shirt, that just separates your content from the average podcast. I listen to 50 podcasts, only 3 of them had t-shirts at the time. Now maybe 30 of them do, but in 2017 it was Conrad and a couple others.
Yeah. So the big move to go into the live venues, that takes you back to your production management days of booking the flights, booking the venues. So talk to me about the pain in the ass that is, and then talk to me about how fun it is when you're actually there at the venue.
Yeah. So to go back, and this is what I told the kids not to toot my own horn, but I kind of recently was able to contextualize this and put it in kind of advice form, because a year ago I applied, but I was selected by Syracuse as one of the 50 fastest growing businesses from Syracuse alumni, and part of going up there and getting the award. But then we also were put on these panels and we're talking to the business school students and things like that. And I'm talking to these kids who, like, even just from talking to them and hearing from them, they know more about business and are more sort of ready for this world than I ever was, because I didn't go to Whitman. I was VPA. I kind of, along the way, you ever see the movie Slumdog Millionaire? So there's this movie Slumdog Millionaire where to kind of put it in a concise point, this kid who grew up poor, who got into a lot of trouble, was around a lot of crime and had this crazy life growing up, ends up on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and ends up winning and getting every question right. And they think he's cheating and must have like an earbud in. But the only reason he knows every question is because randomly every question he's asked intersects with something in his life where he's the perfect person to ask this question, right? And with me, I had this life based on me trying to make it in podcasting earlier on and failing, but trying, me trying to make it in stand-up comedy and failing, but trying, but also knowing how the comedy clubs worked and things like that. And working in production for 10 years where I was doing all this behind the scenes stuff from the bottom level all the way up to the top level, and knowing what is needed, what does cost money, what doesn't cost money, and what, when I'm my own boss, I can choose to not care about and things like that. So that when we started Challenge Mania, and even to this day, I'm willing to, again, it's going to sound like bragging, do the job of about 10 people. And that's not only because I'm willing to do the job of about 10 people, because a lot of people would be too prideful to say, like, go and get the coffee or something like that themselves, or show up or wheel a bag of merch themselves and be the first person in the building and set up the merch table themselves. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we have some volunteer help and things like that. But a lot of people would say, oh, I'd rather pay someone to do that, and I know from the days of paying people to do that sometimes if you're just willing to do it, you should probably just do that yourself. And that's part of the reason that we were able to get the live show stuff off the ground, why we're able to do it with such a relatively small footprint. It's why when we choose our venues, we choose venues where, we cut them in on the door deal, but when we're there, they provide the staff for doing a lot of the things that I physically can't do. Like I cannot bring you your gin and tonic, but I can, entertain you while you drink it. And to go back to the Slumdog Millionaire of it, yes, this is always something I not even secretly, very openly always wanted to do. I mentioned, trying to make it in podcasting, try to make it in comedy. Like I always wanted to host my own talk show. I always wanted to be able to go and do a live improvised thing on stage with 300 people and be able to make them laugh and talk about things they cared about. And like, one way to do it is you're a stand-up comedian. Like, we just went to see Shane Gillis this weekend. He sold out an arena just giving his thoughts. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is do it through the umbrella of all these people in the room care about the challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I wish maybe occasionally we could talk about other stuff? Sure, but we can. Like, there's ways to throw references in there and stuff like that. And you guys even know I like wrestling because I reference it so much on the show and things like that. And there's ways to get jokes in, and there's ways to get as much out of the Challenge Mania Live hosting experience that I might have gotten out of all these other things I dreamed of doing. So, the second that we started doing the podcast, the live show, taking it to the live show thing was like in my immediate, we got to do this ASAP. And that took us maybe 6 months. The first episode of the podcast was done in November 2017. Our first live show was June 2018. And we have not looked back since. And now I will say we're as much of a live show business or live event business as we are a podcast. The podcast is now kind of an arm that supports that. Patreon, which you can go to challengemaniacs.com, takes you to our Patreon, is almost as much about being a part of the live show experience and everything we're continuously doing there as it is about being a podcast. Because since we've started, there are a ton of new challenge podcasts, so and like I said, since we've started, the way that people listen to podcasts, when we started, people were listening to a 90-minute podcast, not just ours, but other people. Nowadays, young people are used to just, clip here, clip there.
Yep.
So, but the one thing we do that nobody does as well, if at all, is the live show thing. And,
Right.
It's from that work experience, but also from just as a, I'll be honest, like I go to more live shows than anyone I know, whether it's concerts or comedy or podcasts or wrestling or games or whatever. My wife absolutely hates me. And it's because I love this stuff. Like I love just being around. I love feeding off the energy of whether it's entertainment or whether it's watching like greatness, whether it's sports or this or that, and just feeding off of the communal experience of holy shit, we are all here while that is happening. And I know why that's a drug for not just me, but for other people. And so that's why I think I'm good at, whether it's me doing it or the people I bring to do it, giving that back to people with Challenge Mania Live.
It's interesting. So what we'll do is after the show, we'll compare live show notes because I've been to a lot of really great live events myself. But it's interesting you bring that up because we're at the point now with this where it's cyclical, right? The whole idea with podcasts were that people wanted to listen and watch really on the go. And now we're reaching the point where people are kind of growing and gaining exposure with their shows so much so that they're actually working as independent live events again. And this is something that Nick and I have really thought about. We have a lot of people who work in the live entertainment space. We've had other musicians and comedians and kind of those types of people on with us. So eventually that's something that Nick and I are going to kind of work towards in time. For you personally, we'll get to the fun part now. What are your favorite cities that you've been to and favorite cities that you've had the Challenge Mania live show at?
Well, I mean, if you follow us, you also know that I famously, not every time, but, I would say 7 out of 10 times we're going to a city. We're probably going there, not just because of the city, but also I try to pick weekends where there's also something else I want to go to while we're there. Yeah. So like we schedule our shows around big wrestling events, games, especially games where we're working with the team on something. So this year we're throwing out 3 first pitches, one in Pittsburgh, one in St. Louis, and one again, which we did last year in Arizona, Phoenix for the Diamondbacks. A couple weeks from now, we're going to do something with the Milwaukee Bucks. A couple months ago, we did something with the 76ers. But then on top of that, like this past weekend, we go to Minnesota. And look, people kept saying, Minnesota in February, it's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. But we get there and we go to the best steakhouse in Minnesota. And shouts to Manny's, who consider themselves.
What else are you going to do in Minnesota in February? You're going to go watch Challenge Mania.
Well, that's what it was for them. And for us, Friday night, we went to see Andrew Santino film his comedy special. Saturday night, we went to see Shane Gillis in the arena. And so to be honest with you, even if the city of Minneapolis was a shithole, which it wasn't, the people were great, and yes, it was a little cold, but the experience is almost awesome at every city we go to. There's only, I mean, it's hard like picking a favorite, but I can. I mean, I think objectively, my favorite city to go to is Nashville because it's kind of like redneck Vegas. You know, it's like
Yes, it
yeah,
is.
yeah, and you know, there's other cities I like going to as well. I like Austin a lot. Those are just objectively cities I like visiting where like, even if we weren't doing Challenge Mania and I had nothing to do or no concert to go to, I think it's be the most fun stuff randomly going on. But then there are cities that just keep continuously giving back to us from like a reciprocation level as far as they show out their great energetic crowd. Philly, Chicago, which is why we go there twice a year. Just like beautiful places to visit like Seattle and Portland, which we don't get to enough. I'll say like it's easier to come to sometimes say what are the more disappointing places. And it's funny because some of the places you'd most want to go, like, you know, Florida, California, Texas, those are the tougher nuts to crack because they're
Yeah.
big states. They all have a lot of major cities and everyone's used to like bands and touring acts coming to their city. And we're kind of like an act where we come to your area maybe once every 18 months, if you're lucky, maybe once or twice. And we need you to be willing to drive sometimes 4 or 3 hours to see us. And the people in the Midwest are willing to do that. The people in the Northeast are willing to do that. I don't know if it's a weather thing or whatnot, but it's harder. Like Southern California, especially, also has a little bit of the like everybody's a star thing. But like San Diego and places you would love to go, and just like in our beautiful places in general, we don't do as well there as we do in, say, Phoenix, right? Which on paper is not like as attractive to go to as San Diego. But if you ask me which place do I like going to more for this, you know, if you ask me where do I want to go on vacation with no, you know, ifs, ands, or buts about it, I'd rather go to probably San Diego. But for the purpose of Challenge Mania, the places we go to there are more welcoming. They're easier to book, whether it's coming
Yeah.
in for a brunch or working with a team like the Diamondbacks. The fans are more like happy to have you there and things like that. So, you know, but so I guess like on paper, my favorite cities are kind of like, you know, Nashville, Austin, Denver, things like that. But my go-to like Challenge Mania cities that I think are just like the ones that just continuously show out for us and we find great things to do there are, you know, Phoenix, Philly, Baltimore, even Chicago. St. Louis is becoming one of those, and Atlanta. We're excited to be going back to Atlanta for All-Star MLB All-Star weekend this year too. So that's another good one too.
Well, I'm looking forward to Challenge Mania in August from the American Dream Mall, the day of SummerSlam. We'll be checking that one out for sure. I know Joe
It's
had
not
the
going to be at the
honor.
mall though. It's not going to be the mall. It's going to be at this place we just did this last weekend.
All
So
right,
yeah, it's
fair
going to be at
enough.
this. It's going to be at the Surly Brewing Company because they were awesome.
All right. So
It's
I
not
was
a
right then
yeah.
about the SummerSlam, the
I already
SummerSlam
told him.
weekend.
I already told him we're coming back summer 2026 for that. So we will be there. And we're probably hopefully we're not doing Vegas for Mania. I actually just decided I'm not even gonna go to Vegas for Mania this year. So I'm gonna sit that one out. But 2026, I have my eye on New Orleans for WrestleMania as
Next
well.
year.
So
Why
yeah.
don't you go to Riyadh for the Royal Rumble next year? Maybe you get a
I'll
big
be
O.
s- I'll be skipping that as well.
But what
And
about this in your backyard this summer, MetLife Stadium?
I
You
will
got to get it
100%, I'll 100% be going, but I don't need to book anything because I get to be here, you know? So it's a lot of
right. You don't
times,
need to travel
a lot of times I book these Challenge Manias. It's basically just because it's an easier conversation to have with my
to
wife
your wife. Yeah.
than I want to go
Yeah.
to Riyadh to go to whatever
Yeah.
it is. And so here, hey, I just say, hey, I just go to New Jersey. I will
Yeah.
say though, here in New York, the experience of literally flying to another city, taking an Uber to a hotel, and then somehow getting to their stadium and then getting back to New York is easier than getting to New Jersey from Manhattan and taking the 4 trains and a bus or whatever the hell I have to do,
And
or
Manhattan's the
200.
worst.
Well, Manhattan is not the worst. It's the Jersey and the MetLife of it all that
Well,
sucks.
going into Manhattan and out of Manhattan's the worst.
There
It's
is
gotten
nothing.
better, believe it or not, with the congestion pricing, which is very, very controversial. But what I will say though is
Scott, are
my
you in
father,
Manhattan or are you in Connecticut?
I live in Manhattan now, so
Okay.
so since I finally could afford to move out of my parents' house, I lived in Manhattan a few times with some friends, varying places, and then since I've met my wife, she and I have lived together in Manhattan in various
Yeah.
places, but we currently live in the East Village
So
with
that
our
would
3 kids.
explain
Yeah.
why, Joe went with Jay to the All Stars premiere party. He had it in Manhattan. Easy commute for you, must have been. So,
Yeah, that's why. I
a lot of
mean, New York
sense.
is another place that gets spoiled. Obviously, there are great turnouts here as well. But since I'm here, it's so much easier. Like I will say the quote unquote viewing parties that we do on Wednesdays. traveling during the week and things like that. And it's kind of a lower ceiling for success and whatnot. So we do a lot more viewing parties here in Manhattan than anywhere else.
Yeah.
So they get spoiled with those. We do 1 or 2 shows here at the Gorgeous City Winery on the east side. So on the west side, I should say. But yeah, we have one coming up on May 4th. Still tickets available if people want to check that out. So,
I have to go, Joe. Well, Scott, give me some names or type of people that make for number one, a good guest for the podcast, and number two, a good person to be at a live event.
well, so it's two different things because the live events obviously has then you have to be cool with or interested in meeting a couple hundred people and
Right.
being energetic with them and giving and hearing their spiels, and these people love to tell them their spiels, and so like Mark Long is perfect, like Mark
Yep.
Long, this stuff never gets old for him. He might get old, but this doesn't get old for him. And like Paulie Calafiore is another one where he just he loves it, he likes the attention, things like that. I think people who embrace that element of it and are people who people look forward to seeing are great. Like, Derek's obviously a great example of that. Johnny Bananas is a good example of that. Cara Maria, for instance, is someone who loves, for instance, people love her, but she does kind of like,
Mhm.
she does have a breaking point of like, okay, I'm a little tired meeting people, not because and she just like, there's a stress that comes with it, right? There's a, hey, am I giving them enough? Am I tired? Whatever. Can we move on type of thing? That's almost the natural disposition. A lot of these people sometimes have to like, have a couple cocktails to work up the energy to just be meeting people. It's like speed dating, you know what I mean? Except
Yeah.
without the sex. It's just signing posters, which is, I think a little easier. But so I would say another guest that I love to have, and sometimes it's a bit of a, it's a gift and a curse, is someone like a Fessy who people swear they don't like him, or a Josh, they swear they don't like him, but then when they meet him, they come out of it going, you know what, now I do like him. And that makes me feel like, we did our job because we gave you the ability to look at these people not just as the one-dimensional person on your screen who said a few things in an hour. You got to see them talk uninterrupted for 90 minutes, whether it's on the podcast or in person. But you also got to meet them and see what they're like in person. And without fail, I think we have a very high retention rate of people, listening to the podcast, and they'll say, wow, I look at this person differently, or meeting them especially. And so I like booking those people, particularly on the podcast. But like, sometimes you put them on a flyer and you get a lot of like, oh no, they're not my favorite. And
Yeah.
that's tough to kind of drudge through. But when you get through that, knowing that you're changing people's minds about people is fun.
Yeah, and Fessy was an open book. Go watch our interview with him.
He was
Is there
awesome.
somebody, is there
He's so good.
somebody that you have never had on the podcast or at a live show that you would love to have on because you think they'd be a great fit?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I will choose from people that we have had on the podcast because there are certain people who have just avoided us completely. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of like, it's more that I want to mend the fence with them than anything, like a Laurel or a Corey or a Coral. And I know those names sound like a combination of each other, which is interesting. But like for me, like people we've had on the podcast that we just haven't been able to have on a live show are like Jordan, who's always good and obviously one of the greats of the challenge world. Miz, who's very generous with us, whether it's on the podcast or when we do get to see him at some of the stuff we go to. He's always saying like, hey, like if it ever works out schedule wise, I'm
Yeah.
down.
Well,
He's just like,
next summer in Minnesota, make it happen.
he's
Yep.
just the problem with the Miz is that, and he will one day do it, and it will be an unannounced surprise. And that's why I always feel like people are always kind of secretly hoping one of these wrestling weekends he'll show up, and I promise you one day he will. But it'll be something we can't really promote, that we can't really put
Yeah.
him on the flyer. You just kind of got to let it happen. But what I'll say is with him is that he is one of the more booked and busy sort of like appearance guys
Oh
for
yeah.
that. Like when they go to a city, they have him at Athlete's Foot at
Everything.
7 a.m. and a wine store at 10 and going on Good Morning Phoenix and whatever. You know what I mean? He's waving the flag at the top of the Riyadh capital. Like that, he's their guy for that. And
Yep.
so unlike some wrestlers who might just need to be at the building by 2, he's probably got 4 other things going on. So it's, again, it sucks. But he's so like last year at SummerSlam in Cleveland, like Mark and I didn't need tickets, but like he got Derek and Darrell tickets. He brought them backstage at SummerSlam. They went on his bus. He had some sort of a bus with him. So yeah, he's obviously top of my list. So I'll go Jordan and Mike. And then on the female end, I'm trying to think who we haven't had at a live show that we've had on the podcast. Again, kind of a cop out answer because it's again one of those mended fences situations, but she did come on twice early. So I'll go with Ashley Mitchell because she came on the podcast twice early and has since kind of soured on us. But if we can fix that, we'd love to have her out there at some point too.
Very nice. Now, as you know, Nick and I are also huge wrestling fans. And as of right now, I don't think there's any better time to be a wrestling fan. Because, like I said, everything works in cycles, right? So it's
Hmm.
not just the WWE with the success of AEW, the resurgence and the revival of TNA. You have people watching New Japan and Ring of Honor stuff. So as of right now, at this point in time, there's as much wrestling as there's ever been. There's a very large increase in popularity to it. The WWE has done some record number of business over the last couple of years or so. So for me personally, like the last, I would say 2 years or so has kind of taken me back to when I was a kid, right?
Hmm.
Kind of into the attitude era, the ruthless aggression era. I think the direction that the company has moved in for the last couple of years has been tremendous. I've been to a lot of live events. I went to SummerSlam a couple years ago. I sat 3 rows behind the table. I sat with Scott Hamilton, who lives in Nashville. It's a friend of Nick and ours. He was able to get me in. I got to see one of the greatest angles of all time when Brock Lesnar with the forklift kind of elevated the ring, and nobody else
Hmm.
could see the show except for me. So the last couple of years have been really, really great to me. I wanted to capture your feeling of the direction of the company for the last couple of years, because now we're working towards, again, Raw's on Netflix. A lot of these B-level pay-per-views and premium live event shows now, they're being held in stadiums, right? So again, doing record numbers. What is your overall feel for the product at the moment? Do you kind of feel the same way, like maybe me and not so much Nick? Nick still has his qualms with the product here and there, but does the feeling now bring you back to when you were a kid?
So what's interesting is I agree. Like I think now is the best time to be ever in the history of wrestling an adult wrestling fan. In that, for instance, so I don't know how old you are, but I grew up in the Attitude Era, but I was an impressionable young middle school slash high school student. And I think that's the best age to have been back then, right? Because to me, like I've always kind of had a pretty good grasp on, even when I was a kid, because it's with school and whatnot, but now as an adult and dealing with pop culture and the world and social media, the role that wrestling has in society and how much it's kind of looked down on, because wrestling has always been something that for whatever reason, people like to try to ruin for you, whether it's, saying, oh, it's scripted or whatever, or just like, oh, grow up or whatever, or that stuff's fake or whatever they want to do. And then there's other times where it's just undeniable that regardless, it's punching through and it's pushing through and it's big business. And, you can make fun of the kid or the adult in the wrestling shirt, but like you can't deny that like The Rock's hosting SNL or the ratings or whatever it is. But now I would say that I think it's people our age growing up and getting positions in the world of whether it's pop culture or sports or journalism and things like that. But it's also the fact that the one thing wrestling's always allowed people to do is get closer to the action, closer to the show, closer to the personalities than any other industry. And now, in the age that we live in, where that is social currency and the photo is social currency, wrestling is like A1 delivery system for that type of thing. And so, like, whereas in 1998, if you saw Stone Cold Steve Austin and took a picture of him, of you and him and posted it, yeah, maybe a couple guys at work would have been like, hell yeah. But like a lot of people would have been like, you're 38. Why are you taking a picture with a wrestler? Isn't that wrestler guy? Whereas now you see the most famous people in the world sitting in the front row at Raw and Netflix, bragging about meeting people, doing cameos at WrestleMania and whatnot, whether it be the Kelsey brothers or whether it be Kieran Culkin or whether it be, anyone other this under the sun. And like I think what's changed in a lot of ways is obviously the product sure has to be good, but I just think we as society, both we grew up, like we're the kids who grew up and now are the adults who in other eras would be making fun of people, but why would we? Because now we like it. But also even for the people who didn't necessarily grow up with it, it fits into their world and social currency, getting to sit close at things, oh, the wrestler talked to me on the way to the ring. Look at this cool thing. Podcasts are so big. Wrestlers are great podcast guests. And the wrestling world is no longer treating people like idiots. The WWE itself is letting people behind the curtain talking about it like it's a work during their post-game press conferences, during when they do Hall of Fame speeches and other things. And it really is the best time to be a 39-year-old wrestling fan who needs to look other dads in the face when you're picking up your kids at school, or maybe needs to go to an office and can say, maybe not with confidence, but with slightly more confidence, that, hey, I was at WrestleMania last weekend, or I enjoy wrestling. And that, I think, is less about the quote unquote product being good and more just the role that it plays in society these days. And that's as much about all of us and technology and things like that, and WWE and wrestling being at the forefront of a lot of those technologies, social media, YouTube, podcasting. WWE was, and wrestling was to the forefront of literally the internet. Like
Yeah.
the
Zack
when the
Ryder.
yeah, Zack Ryder, but also even in the 90s, like some of the first things you could actually use the internet for successfully, other than like downloading JPEGs of like Princess Jasmine nude and stuff, was like wrestling, whether it's pictures or highlights or news or rumors or whatever. WWE.com, I remember, was one of the first like fully functioning websites that kind
Yeah.
of
Websites. That's
mattered,
right. The message boards and everything. WWE has always had an online presence.
Yeah,
It's
and
true.
is it getting so big now that, like, for instance, like you mentioned that SummerSlam, and even that SummerSlam, which was I think 2022, here we are now in 2025, and like part of the reason I'm not going to Vegas for WrestleMania is that, like, full disclosure, like they've kind of priced out not even just
Yeah.
the average person, but like even the
Too
like
much money.
fairly successful super fan. Like these tickets are now at a price where it would be impossible to enjoy this at this price if it was my own money. And I've had the luxury of getting comp tickets or having, very generous friends who have been willing to purchase my tickets for things. And there's absolutely nothing better than that. But I also buy my own tickets a lot. And like, I'll just say that, is WWE getting to the point, and hey, it's capitalism, baby, I get it, where they are sort of pricing almost everyone out of what's great about the in-person experience, whether it be at the
Yep.
Garden or at the Nissan Stadium in Nashville. Yes, that's the con that goes with the pro, but what goes with the pro and goes with those prices even being able to exist is that never has there been more people who make money and spend money interested in wrestling. And before, it used to be people who, yeah, maybe were like, getting their money together, saving their money and spending the next $300 they have on a front row seat. But now it's literally like, hey, can we charge 50 grand for these front row seats? 10 years ago, that would have been absurd. Nobody who has 50 grand is spending it on
Right.
WrestleMania. And now, again, going to the place that it plays in society and going to the status symbol that being a WrestleMania has become, they can charge 50 grand. And if you think I'm pulling that number out of my ass, go to Ticketmaster right now and
WrestleMania.
look at what a 2-day ticket to WrestleMania in the first 5 rows are, and it's 50
Uh,
grand,
well, that's the 2 day thing. We'll get to 3 day, 4 day, 5 day WrestleMania at some point. WrestleMania month, we'll see what happens. But the wrestling fans, they're avid. I mean, when we have wrestlers on our podcast, they always do the highest ratings, and that
Yeah.
just goes to show you where everything is at. Scott, last question from us here. What would you say in your life or your career has been your I'm right moment? What I mean by that, it's a time or place where you wanted to pursue something. You asked somebody for advice. They said, Scott, awful idea. What are you, crazy? That's not going to work out. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway. And in the end, you will see why it is that I'm right about this. And I can tell you, I told you so.
Wow. Well, I won't pick one, but I'll say, because it happened dozens and dozens of times, I'm sure, in my life, when I, tried to say, hey, I'd love to do this for you or do that for you. Or I think, hey, I'm the production manager, but I'd love to be a segment producer, or I'd love to host this thing or that thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then eventually I said, and again, this is what I told the kids at Syracuse. Sometimes if you're not getting offered your dream job, see if you can create it yourself and hire yourself for it. And so what I would say, I was right, or I'm right to, is every single person who, for whatever reason, and it might not have been that they thought, yeah, I think he'd be bad or this other person be better. Sometimes maybe coming from just to say, maybe they thought that I was better suited for or was better helpful to them in the role that I was currently in, but I'll tell you right now what my unique stick-to-itiveness and my unique skill set and my unique combination of theatrics and whatnot, with the, again, experience of doing all the production management stuff, it I think the proof is in the pudding, because a lot of those shows that I was working on since 2017 have since been canceled, and Challenge Mania is still on the air, baby.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, Scott, we appreciate your time. As you know, Nick and I are also in the New York City area. We're in Staten Island, but my father lives in Manhattan. He's a little closer to the Manhattan Bridge. So at some point soon, we have to link up, right?
Yeah, dude.
We'd love to link up at MSG. I have a couple of people who are friend of mine already. We have plans to kind of try to see if we can meet up there. So hopefully we're at MSG May 4th, MetLife for SummerSlam. We got a bunch of events coming up. Obviously, little independent wrestling events here in the city area as the year goes on. But we would love to link up in person. Can't wait to do that. So what we do here is we always give our guests the last words. So if there's anything else you would personally like to share or promote for yourself, where can we find everything? And we thank you again for your time. This was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, if anybody listening to this likes the challenge, check out Challenge Mania. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast. Check out our Patreon, challengemaniacs.com, challengemania.live will tell you if we're coming to a city near you. Again, if you like the challenge, I promise you'll appreciate what we do. If you don't, I cannot guarantee you that, but I will say whatever you do like. If you listen to this episode and enjoyed it, thank you. I appreciate your time, but just keep enjoying what you like. Don't let anybody tell you that it's stupid or that it sucks or that you shouldn't spend money on it. Enjoy yourself, whether it be with your earbuds or with you're buying tickets and going to stuff, as you guys clearly do. So just have a good time. Life is short. I say this, I go, when I die, I want to wait on the line. I finally get to the front. God's checking people in. He looks up, he goes, oh, Scott Yager, dude, crushed it, by the way, crushed it. That's what I want. So, and yes, you guys should both come out May 4th. Let me know. I'll put you guys on the list if you want to come out to the City Winery, and definitely hit me up, Joe, for MSG on the 10th. All right.
Awesome stuff, Scott. We appreciate your time. That's going to do it here for this episode of You Know Him Right, for a guy with an incredible first name, Scott Yager, our special guest, my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.